From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is U.S. Farm Report.
Welcome to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. I'm Tyne Morgan, and here's what's in store over the next 60 minutes. Corn and soybean farmers watch prices fall as USDA says there's a monster crop in the field.
I think the question is not what the yield potential is, but it's how much have we lost in some of the problem areas.
As soybean prices hit new lows, is the ag economy on the brink of a recession? But here's the bright spot, just may be cattle.
We still don't have any compelling evidence that there's any measurable heifer retention going on.
And you could call him a pig whisperer.
So every day I come out and try to make a difference.
Meet a leader in and out of the barn in today's Barn Heroes. Now for the news, USDA releasing its first survey-based predictions of the season, and it's now calling for a record corn crop. The agency upping the corn yield by 2.1 bushels per acre, now estimating a yield of 183.1. Production's forecast at 15.1 billion bushels, up 47 million from last month. And for soybeans, another big number, 53.2 bushels per acre, up 1.2 bushels from last month. Production now forecasted to be at 4.6 billion bushels, up 154 million on those higher yields. And checking on ending stocks, old crop corn at 1.8 billion bushels, down slightly from last month, and new crop at more than 2 billion. On soybeans, 345 million for old crop, unchanged from last month. New crop at 560 million, up 125 million from last month. And for wheat, 702 million of old crop, unchanged from last month, while new crop comes in at 828 million.
This has the stocks ballooning on new crop estimates from 435 million bushels to 560 million bushels. And so that is going to be something that's going to be tough to claw back from.
But how likely are those big crop projections from USDA to happen? Well, right now, only 6% of the nation's corn crop is in drought. And as you can see, that does not include key growing areas in the Midwest. Last year at this time, 49% of the corn crop was in drought. And as for soybeans, it's the same. 7% is in drought, but last year it stood at more than 43%. USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey says right now he sees very few weather-related concerns.
Number one, there's really no sign of any widespread severe thunderstorms anytime soon. And with each passing day, that gets crops closer to maturity. Furthermore, we continue to see the absolute absence of extreme heat.
And Rippey says there seems to be plenty of moisture in key growing areas with more rain falling this past week. Could the Federal Reserve be poised to lower interest rates? A new measure of inflation is continuing to show hopeful signs. The Consumer Price Index shows that year-over-year inflation reached its lowest level in more than 3 years last month. The report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics showing prices rose just 2.9% for the 12 months ending in July. On a monthly basis, prices rose 0.2%. With inflation starting to appear to be under control, economists hope the Fed will reduce borrowing costs to try to get job growth booming again. But the continued belt tightening on the farm and higher interest rates continuing to impact farm equipment sales right now. The Association of Equipment Manufacturers just releasing the latest flash report. It shows that in the first 7 months of the year, sales of 40 and under horsepower tractors were down more than 14%. They're down more than 8% for under 100 horsepower and down more than 6% for 100 plus horsepower. Four-wheel drive tractors appear to be the bright spot, up 5.2%, with the sales of combines down 17.6% so far this year. Market watchers say the issue continues to be lower crop prices and higher interest rates. There's also an oversupply of unsold tractors and combines, leading to price cuts and incentives to move the unsold inventory. All right, that's it for the news. Well, more beneficial rains across key growing areas this week. We'll have a check of your weather coming up next.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by Pioneer. Put Pioneer brand corn's exclusive genetics on your team. Win with higher yields and industry-leading traits. Pioneer brand corn. Your best year starts here. U.S. Farm Report weather is brought to you by H&S Manufacturing. Maximize baleage yield with less time and effort with the LW1100 line wrap bale wrapper. You can wrap round or square bales, and the automatic operating mode allows for a one-person operation.
Matt Engelbrecht joining us now with weather. Matt, when we look at the latest drought monitor, seen some improvements this past week, especially along the East Coast, as well as Kansas and Oklahoma. But we are seeing dryness expand in areas of Missouri, Arkansas, Texas, and even a pocket of Illinois.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Certainly more than enough moisture, more than enough rainfall coming down on the East Coast to really alleviate any drought concerns through Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina. Still have a max or a bullseye into West Virginia, where we are near the severe, if not extreme, drought. Now, we've been talking about it the last couple of days going into last week. An upper level low is carrying showers and thunderstorms in and across the Midwest. That is eventually going to work across the East Coast. So we should see some improvement. I don't think it'll be enough, but some improvement over that area in next week's drought monitor. That should help with some rain coming through, at the very least some cloud cover to kind of keep some of the moisture in the ground. Back into the Midwest, the upper Midwest, we're all good there. A couple of dry spots here and there, but again, we've had some rain the last couple of days in these locations, so expect that to improve in the latest drought monitor coming up on Thursday. As for what's going on in the jet stream, pretty interesting. A pattern setting up, a more typical summertime pattern with heat spreading in and across the United States, and a deep trough trying to dig over towards the East Coast. That's eventually going to eject to the northeast. But with the pattern you see here on Tuesday, what you're seeing is a high amplitude ridge back in parts of the Dakotas. That is going to be hot. That is going to be dry. Anywhere you get this big circle, and then coming into parts of the Midwest, where you have the circle here and this trough digging on the East Coast, looking at cloudy weather as well as some rain chances. And again, that's something that we've seen the last couple of days with this upper level, this cutoff low working to the northeast. As we go forward, what we're going to keep an eye out for is another trough trying to come through in here on the northwest. I'm not seeing that. So by Wednesday and Thursday, rather than cool or cloudy conditions in the northeast and the Midwest and down to the southeast, this ridge is going to take over. And you can see how the area just expanded across the United States. Again, associate hot temperatures, above average temperatures, and dry conditions with this ridge. Back here to the northwest, there's going to be another storm system coming off of the Pacific, but I just don't think it's going to be strong enough to really kick that pattern and alleviate us of any kind of extreme heat. But that is kind of where we're going the rest of the week and possibly into the weekend. Estimated rainfall the next 7 days shows that. Up here to the northeast is that upper level low, that cutoff low, cutting to the northeast, and then quiet. A few pockets, obviously some rain, perhaps a few thunderstorms here and there, but that is a typical pattern that you will see with a dominant ridge of high pressure.
Well, as we showed you at the top of the newscast, because of good weather, USDA thinks there are some monster crops in the field. But what will it take to stop the bleeding in the commodity complex? Darren Fry and Arlen Suderman join me to talk markets next. Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. Darren Fry and Arlen Suderman joining us. Well, a big week with a big August USDA report. Some monster yields coming out of USDA. Arlen, USDA's corn yield of 183.1 bushels per acre. Production forecast at 15.1 billion bushels. I mean, I know that your Stone X estimates, you were estimating a big crop, but are you surprised by USDA's numbers?
Not really surprised. It was a little bit higher than what ours was, but when you look at July weather, it would certainly support that type of a trend or a higher yield. And then when you look at August weather, we could certainly add to that. I think the question is not what the yield potential is, but it's how much have we lost in some of the problem areas based on the problems that we had back in June with record rainfall in northwestern Midwest, and how the positives and negatives add up to each other for the total crop. Because in the end, it's the total crop that really matters.
Well, speaking of that, Darren, I mean, when you look at the state-by-state breakdown of the yields from USDA, their yield expectations, North Carolina's yield down a whopping 32%. We know that the East Coast has been hit by drought, but you look at the I states, I mean, wow, Illinois up 9% at 225 bushels per acre, Iowa with a statewide yield of 209 bushels per acre. You're in Illinois, Darren. Do you think it's possible that we could see a 225 bushel per acre yield out of Illinois this year?
Well, I don't want to say it's not possible, but that is a lot of bushels. When you think of every acre getting 225, where the old record being 214, it seems like a really lofty goal. And so I know grain fill is going to be great across the Corn Belt just because of cooler temperatures, and kernel depth can add a lot. But what I'm most interested to see when Pro Farmer gets out there on their tour is just how this crop compares to other years as far as kernel counts and population, because I think our grain fill will be superior to most other years, and that could add a lot of bushels. 225, I'm not sure, but I think we could have a record above 214 for sure.
Arlen, on the corn side, we did see USDA adjust acres as well. Was that planted acres or harvested acres? Where did we see that adjustment come?
Yeah, is in both planted acres and harvested. And of course, when you adjust planted, you have to adjust harvested essentially. And that came off the FSA certification data. So there will be more adjustments coming. The assumption is going to be that the big adjustments have been made, that additional adjustments to production are largely going to be coming from yield, both for corn and soybeans going forward.
Well, speaking of that soybean yield, Darren, USDA upping their soybean yield forecast by 1.2 bushels from last year at 53.2 bushels per acre. When you see that yield, I mean, it's August. We are in the key time, we know, for soybeans. But do you think that is possible, that 53.2 number?
Yeah, I really do. I think soybean yields are going to be big this year. They don't have some of the issues maybe early. The corn crop saw some of the conditions there in May and June, I think affected corn more. And I think they really will pod heavy and have really big beans in the pod. And so I think we could easily reach that. The burdensome number is the carryout number, obviously, especially if we lack any demand from China and our export side. But yeah, the crop's going to be big for sure.
Arlen, let's talk about that carryout number. Soybeans specifically, 345 million for old crop, unchanged from last month. New crop, USDA penciling in 560 million, up 125 million from last month. You look at some of the buys that we've had from China come in here. Do you think that carry out estimate is that in line with StoneX right now?
Not at all. No, I think we'll be fortunate if this crop is anything close to where USDA put it, to have ending stocks that low. And I think the real problem is going to be with, well, I think USDA is a little too low on the crush number. I want to say that for a positive sign, but on exports, I think they're too high. If you're going to hit USDA's target on exports, then we need to be a lot higher on new crop export sales than we are now. Now, this last week, we saw USDA report nearly 50 million bushels in new crop sales. That was very positive. That brought us up to 216 million bushels of commitments that we need to have, or that we already have on the books for this new marketing year. It starts September 1. But if you look at USDA's target of 1.85 billion bushels, the seasonal pace where we need to be at by that first week of September is 707 million bushels, or almost 500 million bushels higher than what we are now. So over the next several weeks, we need to sell another 500 million bushels of new crop soybeans. It's very possible, but we really need to see it pick up pace. China has very little coverage on for this fall right now. The question is, are they going to? Are they going to do it from us? This is an opportunity for them with these cheaper prices right now to do so, but they also booked a lot of soybeans and took in a lot of soybeans and built up their stocks over the last 6 months from Brazil. And Brazil farmers still have about a fifth of their crop to sell too, if they would decide to do so, to dump onto the market. So there's still a lot of question marks whether we're going to be able to hit USDA's export target for this coming year. And I'm not very optimistic that we will. I think we've got to have the domestic demand.
Well, after the bloodbath in soybeans earlier this week, a lot of producers want to know, how much lower can we go? Is the bleeding over? We're going to talk about that, but we need to take a quick break first. Well, welcome back to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. Darren Fry and Arlen Suderman rejoining us. All right, Darren, the question that everyone wants to know right now after watching the bloodbath that we saw, especially in the soybean market earlier this week, do you think prices are going to continue to go lower?
I do. I think prices will move lower here as we get into harvest. I'm kind of looking for a bounce ahead of harvest. I don't know what will make that happen, but it seems like the market could take on maybe 25 cents on corn, 50 cents on beans, and maybe into that September 1st through the 10th, and then move lower as we get into harvest. We have a big crop coming. unless we have some type of shock where the crop is not there, and I don't know how that would be. So typically you get a little bit of relief after the Pro Farmer Tour, and you might get a bounce that you can sell, and then down in October and November WASDEs would be my guess.
Arlen, I mean, you still have a lot of producers that are sitting on some of their old crop trying to figure out what to do right now. What stops the bleeding in this market?
Yeah, you've got to have a change in the dynamics. And we've seen a slowdown in the bleeding in the wheat market because the Black Sea is cash prices have kind of flattened out. Now we need to see that happen in the corn market. And unfortunately, right now, the market's job is to discourage acreage to be planted in Brazil. They're coming up on their planting season now. So for corn and soybeans, and any rally will increase acreage, whereas we go lower would discourage acreage. That's painful for the farmer here right now to handle. But at the same time, for the longer term health of the market, we need to see Brazil cut back their acreage, and it's only lower prices that'll do that.
Is there any indication that we will see some acreage cutbacks in South America this year, Arlen?
Well, our August 1 survey of customers in Brazil showed that they do intend to cut back a little bit on their summer corn. Now, that's the small crop. That's only about a quarter of their production. The big crop is the winter corn crop, which they plant late January and February. And I do believe if we hold prices down here for the next several months, that we could see contraction in those summer crop acreage. The problem is that would be very painful for us here in the United States to do that, but that's probably what it would take to get them to contract their acreage.
There not only are producers asking how much lower will prices go, but how long are we going to see this low price environment? And as you look at the futures markets, what signals are you seeing, Darren?
I don't see anything to really lift us a long way. I mean, small bounces will be sold, like Arlen said, whether it's cleaning up old crop or more new crop sales. But I think that the next big rally that we could have would come from some type of a problem in South America. And I'm not suggesting that's going to happen, but with La Nina strengthening, we could see problems for Argentina and southern Brazil as we get into next year's growing season. Along with that, I know Argentina is going to have a cutback in acres because of all the leafhopper and bacterial problems they had in this crop that still is being written down. So those acres could be lost, maybe as much as 20-25% less acres, and that might help us out a little bit as well. But that's our only hope, I think, as we come off of this big harvest and lead into another South American growing season.
Arlen, real quick, I know Darren talked about what he's watching next week with the Pro Farmer Crop Tour as we're trying to really gauge how big is this crop this year. What do you want to know next week as scouts hit the field?
Yeah, I'm looking for that consistency through the fields, consistency of stands, consistency of ears, any tip back problems, but mostly kernel size is the big question, I think, this year. And that's hard to tell just looking at it, but kernel size is going to be the main driver with this August weather.
Darren, Arlen, thank you so much for joining us. So we need to take another break, and then we will check in with Machinery Pete for Tractor Tales next.
Welcome back to Tractor Tales, folks. This week we're headed to Ohio to check out a working condition John Deere A that has very special memories for this young farmer.
We got a 1946 John Deere A that my great-grandfather bought when he came home from World War II. He bought this along with 2 other tractors, and he started Hall Apple Orchard. So, and it's been in the family ever since it was brand new, and nothing's changed. Everything is still from the factory. And there's pictures of him on it when he was smaller. There's pictures of my great-grandfather on it. There's pictures of me on it when I was just a little thing. So it's just brings back the good childhood memories and the history behind it. We have just a little plot of garden in the backyard that we use. Normally we pull a tube bottom behind it. In its heyday, it had, back in the day, John Deere made a corn sheller that would go onto these things. That it would take, I remember my grandpa telling me it would take them a whole day to get it on. Once the harvest was done, they'd take that off. Springtime, they'd use it to plant. Come summer, they would put the cultivators on it, the row crops. So there'd be cultivators in the front. You could see it still has its factory front cultivator bracket. Once I'm done restoring my current tractor, this one is going to get restored. And then on the hood, right above where the John Deere emblem is, I'm going to have somebody hand paint in memory of One side's going to be my great-grandfather's dates, and the other side's going to be my grandfather's dates. My grandpa had me sitting on his lap, and he was driving it. And just then, once I could stand up enough to where I'd stand right between the seat pedestal and I would steer, and he would control the hand clutch. And then it got to a point where I got big enough where I could steer and use a hand clutch, and he'd be standing on the back hitch, making sure I knew what I was doing. He did that for about 2 years, and then I drove this tractor all by myself by the time I was 10 years old.
Thanks, Greg. Well, is agriculture on the brink of a recession? That's a key question we asked economists in the August Ag Economist Monthly Monitor. But not all of ag is struggling. That is our Farm Journal report next.
You're watching U.S. Farm Report. Trusted, timely, tradition.
Is it time to hit the panic button on the ag economy? According to new analysis from Texas A&M University, the answer is not yet, but we are getting close. As commodity prices crumbled more this week, costs remain high and is creating a shaky scenario for farmers across the U.S. However, there is a bright spot, and that's this week's Farm Journal report. New warning signs of trouble in the ag economy came again this week. The Kansas City Federal Reserve releasing their latest ag credit survey showing early signs of financial pressure, with the most stress showing up in states that rely on more crops than cattle. The eroding outlook also showing up in the August Ag Economist's Monthly Monitor just released this week.
When you look at what we said for both relative to last month or last year, some of the most pessimistic readings we've had since we've been surveying here on 2024.
The latest Monthly Monitor asked the more than 70 economists surveyed if agriculture is on the brink of a recession. Nearly 60% said yes.
Maybe was surprising to me when we looked at, are we already in a recession? More than 50% said yes, we're already in a recession. That's a big change from where we were just 24 months ago. And a lot of folks are worried about where we sit today.
As concerns about the ag economy pour in, Brown points out the net farm income situation would look even worse if it weren't for more positive prices in livestock.
Cattle, I think, has been helpful in pulling it up. At the same time, we see corn and soybean prices that continue to move lower. We know crop receipts are going to be lower than what they would have said back at the start of the year. Cattle probably higher, hogs probably higher, dairy probably higher, but I also expect production expenses at least not to go up from where they were originally in the first part of the year.
Cattle prices have been the bright spot, and there continues to be optimism in the cattle market as economists say rebuilding the U.S. cow herd could take years.
We're still getting smaller, actually, as an industry. We started this year with the lowest cattle numbers in decades. The indications are that the herd has gotten smaller this year.
Oklahoma State livestock marketing specialist Daryl Peel says the industry is looking for two major signs to see if rebuilding is underway.
One will be heifer retention. That's the big one that we're looking for.
Don Close of Terrain Ag has also been watching the cattle markets closely for decades. He says those strong signals of heifer retention are not showing up yet.
But when we look at the percentage of heifers in the slaughter mix, when we look at the percentage of heifers of cattle on feed that we had an update with the July cattle on feed report, even when we look at the percentage of heifers in the auction receipts, we still don't have any compelling evidence that there's any measurable heifer retention going on.
Peel says they've been getting anecdotal comments from various ranchers who have started holding back heifers, but the numbers show it's not happening on a large scale yet. The other sign that shows rebuilding is not taking place yet is culled cows.
The other one is that cow culling will reduce to minimal levels as producers try to hang on to cows a little bit longer than usual. Cow slaughter is down about 16% this year, but if you look at it in the context of the broader set of numbers, that's probably not enough to indicate that we are actually in the process of herd rebuilding. That's still going to give us a culling rate of 10 to 11%. It'll probably drop down around 9% when we start rebuilding the herd.
Peel says the latest cattle on feed report showed as of July 1st, 40% of all the feedlot inventory is still heifers.
We continue to place heifers in the feedlot. We're not keeping them out in the country, apparently, at this point. And so that's a process that has yet to get started.
Even without USDA's mid-year cattle inventory report this year, signs that show cattle producers have not started to rebuild the cattle herd. And one reason they may be hesitant is because of this.
We got big geographic blocks of the country. It's certainly better, but to give those ranches an opportunity to recharge and really stabilize that grass just now or has not happened yet.
Peel says much of the outlook hinges on drought. He says the current level of heifer slaughter and heifers in feedlots in 2024 suggests that replacement heifer inventory is likely to show modest growth at best in 2025.
I think by and large we've had better forage conditions this year, and some folks can do it and probably are doing it to a limited degree. But there are concerns going forward about re-emerging drought, and particularly with the idea of La Nina rebuilding in the U.S. That's a concern for later this year and on into next year.
The other hurdle may be how expensive it will be to rebuild.
The cost of financing herd rebuilding and just producer expectations for these markets. They're enjoying these high markets right now, but the question is, how long will they last? Will they last long enough to make it worth that investment in those heifers for future production? Apparently producers don't believe we're there yet, so they have not started that process.
Another factor that may make producers hesitant to rebuild is some deciding it may be time to hang up their spurs.
But you take the average age of cow owners, something in excess of 60 years of age, I think there's still a lot of guys looking at total herd liquidation that, hey, I've fought this my entire life and this was my window to get out and I'm taking it.
Until there are hints the U.S. cattle herd is starting to expand, market watchers say the fuel is there to support strong cattle prices.
Obviously, we've had strong prices. We've set new record prices for cattle so far this year. Taking a little bit of a break here in the summer, kind of through the summer doldrums, but the markets are still on track to continue generally moving higher as we go forward.
Is there room in this market for prices to continue to go higher? Absolutely, I believe that there is. Now, I would not have producers expecting to see the market continue to rally at the pace we have for the last 2 years.
But that doesn't mean there won't be hiccups along the way, especially with concerns of a recession.
We've had all the recession talk back in the market since Monday's fiasco. We may or may not, but our real takeaway there from all the measurements that we've been able to look at and dream up, we think consumer demand for beef, particularly retail, but even HRI, is still incredibly solid.
And to end on a sad note, the beef industry lost an incredible voice this past week, and we lost a courageous colleague here at Farm Journal. It's with a very heavy heart we share that our Farm Journal coworker and friend, Greg Henderson, has passed away. Greg passed early Friday morning. He was a fixture in the beef industry through his work as an editor and writer for Drovers for decades, providing in-depth analysis as well as covering all aspects of the beef industry. But he was also an advocate for the beef industry, leading and participating in panel discussions with experts to address the tough issues, as well as arming producers with information with his State of the Industry reports, helping farmers and ranchers understand current trends and challenges. Our sympathies are with Greg's wife, Ruth, and his family. We're truly going to miss our cowboy. USDA has announced several soybean sales recently, including some major buys from China. And those exports are needed right now amid lower prices. USDA releasing the latest ag trade numbers for the first 9 months of the year, October through June, with exports totaling $135.3 billion. That's down 4% from the previous year. Ag imports coming in at $154.1 billion. That's up 4% from before. It leaves a deficit of $18.8 billion, $11.6 billion lower than it was in 2023. Experts say there is continued cooling of U.S. export values, which is tied to bulk commodities, which account for a third of all ag exports. But the issue isn't because crops are not being sold and shipped.
Corn, which we said was down 6% by value, is actually up 29% by volume.
Export values for wheat, corn, soybeans, and cotton were all down. To meet USDA's forecast, exports need to average $11.74 billion over the next 3 months. Well, the National Milk Producers Federation and the U.S. Dairy Export Council are asking the government to prepare a plan if Colombia moves forward with imposing tariffs on U.S. milk powder exports. The country claiming U.S. milk powder is a like product to one manufactured in the country. The group's sending a letter last week to the U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tyne and to Ag Secretary Tom Vilsack, asking the leaders to leverage all available tools if Colombia moves forward with tariffs, saying the threat has no merit. Currently, U.S. producers export about $70 million worth of milk powder to Colombia each year. Well, that's a glimpse of ag around the world. Well, some producers may have to pay back disaster aid payments from USDA. We have the details on why in Chip's Corner next. Welcome back to Chip's Corner this weekend. Chip, first things first. Are you ready for Crop Tour next week?
Yeah, you bet. You bet we are. We're ready to roll. We've got the drivers and the riders all lined up. We've got a great group of scouts, almost 50 scouts that are going to be on the western leg of the tour. We've got, of course, we've got all the routes ready to go because we've been running the same routes out on the western leg since 1998. So yes, Tyne, we're ready to go.
Well, I'm excited to see you next week in person, and so we'll have that next week during Chip's Corner. But before Crop Tour, I know that's next week, but the focus this week, a lot of things, even coming out of D.C. I know you had an important conversation with Farm CPA Paul Neiffer this week.
Yeah, absolutely. Remember the emergency relief program, okay? It was, you don't even have to sign up. We're just going to sign you up based on the data at FSA. Just stand by because the check is on its way. Well, turns out that they're looking back and doing some auditing on those checks that just came your way. And in many cases, they're deciding that there needs to be a repayment of the ERP payments on 2022 provisions. Now, why is that? Well, you know, you've got 80 acres. What if 2 acres or even 1 acre is a waterway and was uninsured on crop? Now, you would think that in most cases and most programs, USDA would decide, listen, there's got to be a repayment, but we just need a repayment based on those 1 or 2 acres that were uninsured. Paul Neiffer said that is not the case.
No, it's a full, because once you fail to insure 1 acre, we're talking 1 acre. Once you fail to insure 1 acre, they go back and recalculate your payment. Instead of qualifying for the 10% loss coverage, you now have to qualify for the 30% loss coverage, essentially. And I may be using the wrong terminology, but that's essentially what it is. So therefore, you don't qualify for any payment. You got to pay the full amount back. And again, who's going to cover your waterways? I mean, you're mowing the waterways, but technically, I guess it's hay and it's supposed to be covered. Who's, you know, you happen to have a couple of acres of prevent plant that, quote, didn't meet the policy definition, so got kicked out. So therefore, you're not covering that with crop insurance. So again, I personally called it playing games. And
how big of a deal could this be?
Oh, you know, in parts of the Midwest, huge deal. And I've already heard from about 8 different farmers and or crop insurance agents that their farmers are having to pay the stuff back.
What?
Yeah. Those payments on the 2022 ERP, when the check showed up, I remember when that started, Tyne, producers were surprised that these checks showed up. Well,
I do remember that now.
Well, surprise. You might have to pay it back.
So many questions. I'm sure we'll continue to follow this.
We
Chip
will.
Flory, thank you so much for joining us again. You can catch him 10 a.m. Central every day for AgriTalk AM, 2 p.m. Central for AgriTalk PM. All right, we need to take a quick break. And then I guess you could call him a pig whisperer. We're going to introduce you to the next barn hero right after the break. Authority, respect, admiration, empathy. Out of those traits, what makes a good manager? Well, today we meet a man wielding all of those traits as he celebrates his team at Seaboard's pork operation in southwest Kansas. And as Clinton Griffiths tells us, he was nominated as this month's Barn Hero.
Every day. Pigs are healthy. Pigs are thriving.
Every interaction.
Looks good.
Every barn full of pigs is a chance for Ariel Gonzalez to make an impact.
I take a lot of pride in what I do out here, and it matters a lot to me. So every day I come out and try to make a difference.
It's work that started more than 2 decades ago.
I was thinking I was only going to be here for the summer, and then the summer went by, and 21 years later, I'm still here.
Today, he's the production manager for Seaboard Foods, Region 6, covering 8 multi-sites, 412 barns, and more than 400,000 pigs a year.
Ariel has got a very unique combination of talent and experience. His communication skills are good. He's been in the facilities for a long time. Most employees know who he is. He cares a tremendous amount about what he does each and every day.
Working in the pork industry and around thousands of pigs was a new experience when Gonzalez started.
I mean, maybe one pig I've been around in my whole life prior to Seaboard. So when you come in and you walk into a barn that houses 1,000 pigs, you're taken back and you're in shock. But then they're very curious animal.
He had to learn to see the barn and the pigs individually.
And I'm like, they all look the same to me. They all look the same. I mean, we want to, pull out the ones that aren't competing in the pen. We want to pull them out and put them in a lesser competitive pen. And I'm like, man, they all look the same. I don't know. And it takes a while for your eye to develop the difference and it's very what we call tunnel vision, just looking at one thing. And with time and with experience, you get to broaden that tunnel.
Lessons he's now teaching and sharing with others.
Pigs react to your sounds and whistles, so it becomes something normal for all the employees to make sounds so you can get a reaction from pigs and see, how they're doing, their mental state while doing that. Sometimes that's how we evaluate that. The health of the barn, we evaluate through their activity level.
You can see employees gravitate towards Ariel because he's got a smile on his face. He's there to help.
It's very challenging on a big, diverse group of people to try to find that, what challenges them and what motivates them.
From his early days as one of the few bilingual speakers on the farm to now a dedicated employee with years of management experience, Gonzalez is all in on the importance of his work.
You go to the store and you look at a slab of pork and it has our label on it, and you're like, it makes me feel proud to say we put that out there.
In rural communities, so many kids leave the area and gravitate towards urban areas. Ariel stayed here. He's built a life and a career for himself and for his family.
From a summer job to building a life and a future inside these walls, with a new title in tow, Barn Hero.
I think a barn hero is someone that just shows up each and every day with a good attitude, a positive outlook, wants to do the right thing each and every day for our pigs and for our people.
I enjoy what I do, and if that makes me a hero, then that's good enough for me.
Thank you, Clinton. Such an uplifting story. I can see why you could call him a pig whisperer. All right, up next, it's a major crop tour that happens every year. And as we brace for the 2024 Pro Farmer Crop Tour, there's one major question Brian Grady, editor of Pro Farmer, is looking to get answered next week. We'll tell you what that is next. Well, next week at this time, we'll be getting a better look at the crops for ourselves. That's because the annual Pro Farmer Crop Tour kicks off on Monday, and we'll have the results next weekend on the show. It's the first national crop tour that will get a glimpse of the actual crops by going into the fields. Crop Tour has been going on for more than 30 years, and just like the past few decades, we'll be heading into fields in Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Minnesota, Nebraska, Ohio, and South Dakota. Each night, crews in the East and West will meet to talk about the samples, and tour leads Brian Grady and Pro Farmer and Chip Flory of AgriTalk will bring you the yield forecasts for each state. But we caught up with Grady before he jetted out for Ohio to kick off the tour this coming week to ask him, as he ground truths the crop, what is he watching the closest next week?
Ground truthing is absolutely the right phrase to use because they are physical samples. I think Illinois obviously is the number one because 225 for a corn yield not just would beat the record, but would absolutely annihilate the former or the current record at 214. And so we need to find really good fields pretty much across the entire state. There can't be too many duds in there that we get into. So that's number one. But followed closely by Indiana, Iowa, Nebraska, and South Dakota, because record yields are forecast in each of those 4 states as well as Illinois. And so 5 of the 7 crop tour states that we'll be in are predicted to have record yields.
With USDA indicating there are record yields in the field as of August 1st, Grady says this is what Pro Farmer Crop Tour needs to find to support those record yield estimates. Well, we had Brian spill the beans on so much more on Crop Tour. You can check that out on our podcast that Clinton and I host called Unscripted. That's on the Farm Journal YouTube page. And then next week, we will bring you those Crop Tour numbers each night on Farm Journal social media channels as well as agweb.com. And then, of course, tune in next weekend and we will have our entire show from Crop Tour. Well, that does it for U.S. Farm Report this weekend. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to tune in next weekend as we work to build on our tradition. Have a great weekend, everyone.
U.S. Farm Report is produced and distributed by Farm Journal Broadcast.